Today we're talking about the most common repairs found when doing appraisals and pre-listing home inspections. I'm Rovena Turnage with Long River Realty, branch manager, realtor in Quartzsite. I'm here with owner, broker, and host Tim Holley and appraiser, excuse me, appraiser realtor Jaredsrail. Jared, what can you tell us about the most common repair issues you identify as an appraiser?
Hi, good morning, Ravina. The primary focus on an appraisal with what we are required to look at in terms of repairs revolves around safety. So things that can affect the safety of the occupants. There are other things, but that's one of the big focuses and why we have to require repairs. Is revolving around safety. So, going into that, some of the most common ones we see, well, here, not involving safety, would be peeling paint. Um, that can be a safety issue on a home that's an older home where lead based paint is a concern. Then we're talking about a safety issue. But for certain loan types, we are required to call out peeling paint. And the primary reason for that is the damage that can happen to the exposed wood. You don't want the wood to be exposed because then it damages the underlying fascia or wood or those kind of things on a house. And if that affects the security of the loan that is backing the mortgage. Okay. So that's the main reason with that. Safety items, electrical is a big one. Exposed electrical wires can pose a major safety risk. Now, I'm going to go into that a little bit because there's some misconceptions of what does exposed wires mean, right? Um, you could have a house that has an unfinished garage, right? There's no drywall. It's framed. It's got exterior walls. Well, you're going to have electrical in that garage still. You're still going to have light switches, outlets, and things like that. You will have insulated wire running through those walls, but that wire should go into the box, and then the box should have an outlet or a switch in it, and then there should be a cover, a faceplate like you would normally see inside of a house. That outlet should be covered. The outside of the box doesn't pose any safety risk. The wire itself showing in the wall does not pose a safety risk. It's an insulated wire. So if it's wired properly and goes into the box and then the box is properly covered, then there's no safety risk there. 6-year-old Johnny's not going to stick his finger in there and get electrocuted, right? Um, so the fact that you can see wires is not the risk. It's the exposed wiring where you can actually get electrocuted that is the problem.
So Jared, real quick on that, I've seen some old wiring jobs where people splice a couple wires together using the wire nuts. And so, are those okay as long as there's no bare wire showing?
I'd be looking at the situation probably but and no, that doesn't sound like that would pose a safety risk. I'm sure there are some scenarios where special circumstances might dictate that it could potentially pose a safety risk, but in general, if you have wires that are cut off where there was a ceiling fan before and you put wire nuts on it, there is not exposed electrical there. Now you have a fan or a light that's not working or not present, but that in and itself does not necessarily disqualify the property. That's going to be kind of a case by case situation, but I would say no, that doesn't automatically become an issue. That
Okay.
does, though, make me think about like missing safety equipment, like smoke detectors. So
Mm.
when I go through a house, I'm not looking to bring the house up to the current code, which requires more smoke detectors or CO detectors or other things like that that were not required when the house was built in, say, 1980. Um, in 1980, you might have had one smoke detector in the hallway with 3 bedrooms right around it, and that's the smoke detector that serves that whole portion of the house. Um, if that one smoke detector is missing and there's wires there, that's a problem. Now you have no smoke protection in the entire house. Um, but I'm not checking for code compliance to current code requirements. In some states, that may be required, but here in Arizona, that is not a requirement. Um, but there are other states, we have some neighboring states that do require you to add the smoke detectors and things like that to bring to current code. But I'm not an expert on that stuff. I just know that it's there. We aren't looking for that. But if there is a smoke detector there and it's been removed, then that's when it becomes a concern. You
So
have
when it's obvious, you see some wires hanging down from the ceiling or the plate where it screws onto, then that's an obvious call out at that point.
Mm.
exactly that, and that's and maybe I'm hopefully I'm being clear on that, but that's what I'm looking for. If the house had four and two of them are removed, that's a problem. But if a house has one and none are removed, that's not a problem. So
Yeah,
it's
those
not
are
about
probably
how
the
many
two
are
that
there.
had
It's
dead
about how many
batteries.
are intended to be there and haven't been tampered with.
Right. So
Um,
along with smoke detectors, what about cover plates over electrical outlets? The
Yeah.
ones,
So just like I talked about in the garage, even in a house, so if you take the cover plate off of a switch or an outlet inside the house, now that poses a safety risk. If somebody sticks their finger in there, I used 6-year-old Johnny earlier as an example, but
he's at the
60-year-old me
hospital
might
now.
do it too, right? So
Right.
it is a safety issue. Somebody could stick their finger in there and get electrocuted. It's not going to be a good time. So um, that's the safety issue. Plumbing. There's some plumbing things that we see on a regular basis. One example would be water heaters. Now,
Mhm.
the loan type does dictate what some of the requirements are. So if you're preparing for a listing, you don't know if that listing is going to have an FHA loan, a VA loan, a USDA loan, a conventional loan, or no loan at all, right? And so, making the water heater meet that might not be called out in every kind of appraisal if you're talking about appraisal. So, as a listing agent, I'm not necessarily preparing my client for a specific loan type, but it can come up depending on the loan type. Once we've accepted an offer on a property, now we know usually what the loan type is, or at least what they said it was going to be. And that can change sometimes during the course of a contract, but now if it's got an FHA loan or a VA loan or this kind of loan, we want to make sure that the home meets the minimum requirements for that kind of loan before the appraiser comes out.
And that's the important thing on having an experienced broker or agent, because doing that walkthrough listing, like we're talking about, we have to be able to put in our paperwork what type of loans that we feel this home qualifies for. Is this house, fall under cash only? Does it fall under cash conventional? Now you have a box we kick cash, conventional, USDA, FHA, VA. There's so many different boxes that we need to check, and that's something we need to let our sellers know that, hey, because of this, this, and this, There's only certain avenues that this house is going to be able to go. And sometimes that can affect the value of the home in some cases, not all, but maybe in some.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're limiting what kind of loan a house can get or no loan at all, now you've limited your buyer pool potentially, right? So
Exactly.
the home being able to qualify for all types of loans is definitely a plus. And I don't think I even went into the water heater. Um, what the biggest thing that we see on water heaters is, and something that appraisers are generally looking at, especially with FHA and VA loans, and is the discharge pipe on the pressure relief valve. So a lot of times a water heater gets replaced, and that little pipe that just goes down and it may die. It's supposed to die within 6 inches of the floor or be plumbed outside. Um, the reason is if that valve opens up and you're standing there next to the water heater, you're going to get scalding hot water in your face, and that's not going to be good. Coming straight from the water heater at full heat, that water's really hot and can burn you. So the purpose of the pipe is to divert it down to the floor at a minimum. Depends on the area. Some areas it's required to be piped outside. So the requirement in one area might be different than another.
And also the type of material used for that piping. I see it called out if someone hooked it up as PVC coming up and down to the ground. I've seen that called out in occasions that inadequate plumbing for the piping of that. Do you see that, or do you call that out as an appraiser?
Yeah, there are certain types of material that are intended to be used for that drain pipe. Copper would be one that's acceptable, but some types of plastic are meant to handle heat. Other types are not. So you want to talk to your plumber about what type of material is supposed to be used. Um, to make sure that it can withstand the heat. Um, but I mean, going back to how it's piped, it should be at a minimum within 6 inches of the floor. If you're in a garage, that's great. If it's in a bedroom closet, I don't think you want that pipe to stop 6 inches above the floor.
Right.
You
And
probably are wanting that pipe to be piped outside. But most of the time we see it in the middle of a house like that is going to be, like a manufactured home or something where you can run it through to the crawl space. But you don't want to flood the house either.
now, if you see the water heater sitting on the ground and not in a pan, it's just freestanding on the ground, no lift stand on it, or no drain pan underneath it. Do you call that out in an appraisal?
No, well, so different areas have different code requirements, and different points in time have different code requirements of whether it wasn't always expected to be on a stand. So by itself being on the floor directly is not necessarily a compliance issue, but it could be depending on where the property is located and what the code requirements are. But the appraiser is not really doing a code inspection. The appraiser is more looking for a compliance inspection. I'm looking at safety when it comes to that. I'm not, you know, necessarily checking code compliance, just like with the smoke detectors, because when the house was built in 1980, it may have been acceptable for the water heater to be sitting on the floor. We generally now in all new houses are seeing them elevated on a stand. Um, the ones usually inside of a manufactured home are usually sitting on the floor in the home, but then that pipe is plumbed outside,
Right.
and there may or may not be a pan there. So, um, that can be, that's more of a code compliance issue. I believe, than it is an appraisal issue.
Okay.
But we see the plumbing not the pipe not being there as intended is the biggest thing that I'm running into with that.
Yeah, because a
Um,
lot of times those relief valves are at eye level or face level. So you're there and that thing goes off, that's going off in your face.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, I talked about this is aside from an appraisal, and this is aside from necessarily realtor, but just as a homeowner, if you have a water heater in a garage and it may be to code, it may have the pipe that stops 6 inches above the floor. If that water heater goes, it's going to cause a lot of damage to drywall and things that are around the water heater. The water damage isn't good, so that's why you are starting to see more and more pans installed, plumbing directly outside. Um, and I just replaced a water heater recently on my house, and mine was on a stand and went within 6 inches of the floor previously. However, when it leaks, it leaves water all over the floor, right? By the time you know that it's an issue, it
Right.
needs to be replaced, it makes a mess. And so I put a pan under it, I plumb the pan outside, and the pressure relief pipe goes into the pan. So the reason, I mean, you can just plumb the pressure relief valve straight outside, but then if the water heater itself starts leaking not through the pressure relief valve, then you're still going to have a mess, and that's where the pan comes in.
Right.
So I plumbed the pan outside, and I plumbed the pressure relief down into the pan. That way, if that valve opens, it drains through the pipe to the outside of the garage, and if the water heater itself starts leaking, that also will drain directly outside. Um,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
just preventive maintenance. That's not necessarily required, but it's something, we got to use a little bit of common sense with where's the water going to go, because they do break.
Yeah, and that used to be even in the newer manufactured homes now. The water heater closet's outside. The newer homes, they're generally in the garage, up on a stand with the relief valve, plumbed out of the house. But you get into some of the houses in the '70s and '80s, and maybe even the early '90s. They all are set up with the older system. So that's one thing that the homeowners really need to take a look at, um, is where that's at. And that's the nice thing, is that it's going to be called out. But yeah, water heaters can make a big mess if they decide they're done.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, electrical, the water heater, and peeling paint are probably the most common items that I see when I'm doing an appraisal. Um, you know, I'd like to talk a little bit too about, from a listing standpoint, when you're getting a house ready to sell it, and you start thinking about what repairs do I need to make to have the house ready to list? Um, what repairs do I need to make to have the house ready for the appraiser? Those ones I just talked about are the most common things, but anything to do with safety is going to be a must. I've seen different schools of thoughts from agents in terms of, do you have a home inspection prior to listing the home and then repair everything on the home inspection? And my personal opinion is that it's not necessarily a bad thing in that regard, but my personal opinion is then the buyer is going to come in and probably order their own home inspection. And what you thought was important and what they think is important might be two different things. And what their home inspector called out might be different than what your home inspector called out prior to listing the property.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that when you brought that up, because I've seen deals where even a home inspection was done on a property in escrow. The potential buyer saw stuff in the home inspection they didn't like. Could have been fixed. It wasn't a major issue, but to them it was a major issue, so they canceled the contract. Then the house is listed there. It goes 2, 3, 4 months later, and then there's a new offer on the house. And I've seen people say, because Arizona's a disclosure state, you have to disclose the home inspection. And so I've seen people say, no, I don't want to get one of my own, thinking that they're going to save themselves $500. I'll just use the last one. But you know what? If there's been a time lapse, who knows what's happened? And again, like you said, Jared, each home inspector may call out something different. And so I always encourage, I mean, if it's more than 30 days old, it's for you. The last one was, now given to the seller because Arizona law requires that if you don't buy the home, you got to disclose everything you know about it. But yeah, I'm 100%. Don't go with the old home inspection. Get a new one for yourself.
I agree with that. I actually had a buyer who I highly discouraged using the previous home inspection, and they felt good about it. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's their decision, right, to spend the money or not to. And um, I'd say within a month, they found mold inside the walls of the home, and they couldn't, there was no recourse. There was nothing that they could do about it because they went with the previous home inspection instead of getting their own, right? And so there's a lot of nuances to that. You don't know who the home inspector was. Did the seller have a relationship with them, or did they just, did they do a thorough inspection? I'm not saying they didn't, but that home had signs of previous issues as well, that weren't identified in the home inspection. So it really costs the buyer a lot. So I highly discourage using a previous home inspection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you're getting a house ready to list it for sale, you know, um, as opposed to necessarily doing a pre-home inspection, which a lot of some agents like to do, some homeowners like to do. I like to have the house ready to show. The visible stuff that you see is what the buyers are going to see when they walk through the home. That's what's going to sell the house. Then they can order a home inspection once you're under contract. Then you can make repairs of the unseen items if necessary to be able to continue with the transaction, as opposed to trying to fix a bunch of stuff beforehand that may or may not be important to the buyer that's coming in to buy it. I mean, on the flip side, getting a home inspection before and then making those repairs isn't a bad thing. You're trying to make the house as nice as you can, but those are things to think about, things to weigh when you're getting the house ready to sell it.
Especially if it's not broke, don't fix it. Yeah. Yeah. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So
I agree with that too. I would say, also don't focus so much on cosmetic. I mean, now peeling paint, yes, that is cosmetic, but you clearly explained the reasons why, it can be more than cosmetic, especially when it comes to certain types of loans. But yeah, the real issues, they may be costly, more than just painting your house or something. But those are the safety issues, are more important than painting your house.
when you guys keep talking about peeling paint, you bring back memory issues for me. When I was young, and I'm not real old, but I'm old enough to be around when paint was a little rubbery when it was peeling off the walls. And as a kid, I did try it. I peeled it off there and chewed on that rubbery to see what this was all about. And then I went and played under the high tension power lines. So that's what's wrong with me, people. Right there, I'm disclosing Arizona's disclosure state. Here's why I may be a little bit off. I liked peeling paint as a kid and playing under the high tension lines. So,
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Yeah, don't eat that old paint. The lead based paint issues can be a concern. Tim, don't
yeah, my
maybe
days are
there's
over.
some lasting effects from that. I don't know.
It is. I'm telling you.
Tim, you need to
So
do a detox.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, on the newer homes, at post 1978, when the lead based paint was outlawed, um, on in the interior of a home, we're not looking at peeling paint on uh,
Excuse
newer
me.
homes, but on an older home, if there's peeling paint inside of a home, that's an issue too. We don't see a lot of peeling paint inside of homes,
No, because
but
I ate it
on
all, so it's good.
a home built prior to 78, that it can be called out in the appraisal. Um, I mean, there's peeling paint. Paint doesn't just usually peel a whole lot inside of a house. It's mostly out in the sun, and especially here in Arizona, it gets beat up in the sun and starts to peel. Right?
Yeah, and that's not as much of a safety issue, but it could be. But it's important is to keep the house. It's a protection of the wood because you want to keep that wood sealed up from the sun and from any other little critters that might decide they want to live in the cracks of the cracked wood. So
And speaking of critters, I mean, out the exterior, it can be a sign of termite damage, you know.
Yeah. There's actually, when you talk about critters, there is a requirement, like on a raised manufactured home, the skirting needs to be installed all the way around the home, and that is specifically to keep critters and things out from under the home, and we're looking for moisture issues and things like that around the base of a home. Um, there shouldn't be puddling up against the walls. There shouldn't be mud coming out from underneath a manufactured home, and things like that as well. That when you brought up critters, it made me think of the skirting on manufactured homes.
yeah, and I think on that, the FHA and VA call out the wood to earth contact.
Hmm.
So that's another thing that, when you do your walk around, you need to let the people know straight out, hey, these rocks, I know it looks beautiful on your landscaping, but they shouldn't be pushed right up against the wood there. That actually needs to have a little barrier, for the longevity and for everything else. I would suggest moving those rocks away from any of the wood skirting or the steps, the stairwells. I've seen them not sit on an anchor tall enough that wood's sitting right into the ground. That's going to get called out in an appraisal.
Also, plants. I have two. I didn't think they were really too close to my house, but um, they were called out because, well, I had a couple termites because of them. Never gave it a second thought, you know. But the moisture, you water the plants get water, so
Well,
it
and I've
draws, you
yeah, and
know.
I've seen it with trees. Trees grow up on the side of the house. The next thing you know, the wind blows and the tree branches are scraping on the roof and doing a little damage to the shingles. And people don't
Yeah.
think about it because you're not up at that level. You're down below the tree, and that's a big, beautiful tree. Oh, look, it's even shading my house, and it's also scraping off the shingle. So there's a lot of things that people don't realize that. Yeah, it looks like it's cool, but that could affect the listing side of it. And there could be appraisers that call that out for FHA or VA. You need to get that tree trimmed up real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Um, that's a good point. I don't know that I've ever called out not having a tree trimmed, although I could see that becoming it would have to be a specific issue. I have had where um, you have weeds built up so bad around the home
Hmm.
that it's a potential fire issue. I'm talking like really, you're talking really excessive to where that becomes a dangerous situation. Um, you
And,
know,
and I think what this is leading us right into is our next podcast coming up. We're going to have Mike Johnson from Amerispec with us. And I think now we're starting to get into the stuff that he's going to tell us about those big, wonderful reports. And so I think this is probably a good time to say, you know what, everybody stick around. We're going to have Mike Johnson from Marispec here to talk more about it. And Rovena, why don't you go ahead and wrap us up, because I think that gives everybody something to look forward to for our next podcast.
All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this content, and if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and comment so we can answer your questions. We'd like to hear from you. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week with
All
Mike
right.
Johnson, our special guest.
All right.
Marispec, right?
All right. Yep.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.